You don't even have to exhume it. You could have just not buried her. And said, we need to continue searching her body for clues, and then we'll bury her. But John said, no, she's been through too much. She's dead. I'm sorry to say it like that, but she's dead. And I don't mean to be just crass. She's dead. She doesn't know anything. JonBenet Ramsey was brought upstairs. Patsy and 5 of her friends fell on JonBenet and clutched her and cried. Clutched her and cried. Contamination. Now, looking at John and Patsy Ramsey, this one is like it's like 4 pages compared to what we saw like 8 to 10 for the Kobe Bryant. But this is 4 pages. Now, get this napkin out of my way. I took some notes, and again, this is coming from the oral history of Hal Haddon. You can search it up. It's on the internet. But he has some interesting things to say. And the first thing that I kind of mentioned, or that I wrote down here, is that he said JBR was murdered on the 25th, but actually the 26th, which would go to our theories about that she was murdered early, in the early hours of the 26th, in the morning of the 26th. So he says it here. She was murdered Christmas Day. I think actually the 26th of December of 96. I have a very remote ranch in Southwest Colorado, which is not have television, not now nor ever. So I wasn't aware of what's going on, but this thing was so enormous because she was a child beauty queen, and the people, John and Patsy Ramsey, were considered to be very rich, successful, and showy rich in the sense that they were seen a lot at society functions. And so the first thing that kind of caught me was the fact that he said, having talked to John and Patsy Ramsey, having been the main counsel for John and Patsy Ramsey, being the intricately or the detailed lawyer, or the intricately involved lawyer that he is, he said she was murdered on Christmas Day, actually the 25th, or actually the 26th, which is funny because John, as we know, put the 25th on JonBenet's tombstone to try to associate her with that. And what he is trying to do is he's trying to say that, hey, you know, it could be argued that JonBenet was dead on the 25th. Could be argued that because we don't know. All we know is that we laid her down at 9:30. We laid her down, and from there she went missing. And so he's suggesting that possibly in some way JonBenet could have been murdered on the latter part of the day on the 25th. And Hal Haddon said that'd be the 26th, actually, which, prior to Patsy and John getting up, that'd be the case. And so John and Patsy were showy rich because they were seen at a lot of society functions and such. So John and Patsy over the years were all their time in Boulder since 91, I believe, were very intentional about developing relationships, which is what you're supposed to do. Very intentional about developing relationships and forming networking opportunities with people. So getting involved in a lot of society functions, which, Patsy, Vanity Fair article tells us about Patsy. Not only that, but Judith Phillips mentions it. I think Patsy herself mentions it, the level of involvement. And so John is kind of tagging along in those things. He needs it, but he kind of doesn't. He's just there to rub elbows with people and rub shoulders with people and just say hello. But this is more so of a Patsy thing. The next thing that I write down here in my notes is that Haddon says that the parents come down, and I think I have it here. He mentions that John has this software company, but he goes on to talk about the parents come down on Christmas morning and they find a note. And right here, and he says, when the parents come down in the morning on Christmas, they find this ransom note and their daughter's missing. Patsy Ramsey, the mother, calls 911, screams, says, my daughter's gone. Well, the police arrive, the press arrives. I have a problem with this because he doesn't correct this. So the facts of the case, if we're going to talk about the facts of the case, was JonBenet, did they tell you that JonBenet? Maybe, because my thing I wrote down, maybe he misspoke. And so I wanted to wait to see the rest of the article. But nobody corrected him. He said Christmas morning. Nobody corrected him. So was she murdered on Christmas morning or the day after Christmas? Why is this a big deal? This is a big deal because John and Patsy are consistently waffling on important facts and information about the case. So you never really know what to believe, because John says, when I got JonBenet out of the car, she was dead as a doornail. She was out like a light. Almost dropped her. Almost hit her head on something and dropped her. People sort of hypothesize that she was killed on the 23rd, well before what was reported. Which, the rigor mortis, I don't think holds up to that. The understanding of the rigor mortis, I don't think holds up to that. So it's hard to say that. But when you say that she was dead in the morning of the, I think you misspoke, but you're not corrected, right? And so that's a little weird. So moving on, I have in my notes next, it says Haddon says that the Ramseys lived in a gingerbread house. And I'll kind of go down to that part here. He said, the press from all over the world descended on Boulder, Colorado, descended on the Ramseys, who were living in this sort of gingerbread house in the middle of Boulder, where their child had disappeared. And I didn't really understand what he was saying, so I kind of tried to look it up, and maybe you can kind of help me with this, what he means by this. But Haddon says the Ramseys lived in a gingerbread house, which I think, from what I was looking up, means that it looks good on the outside, but it's really internally delicate and not made to withstand a lot of pressure. So a lot of things that, a lot of the things about the life of the Ramseys are for appearances, but are not actually true, right? And so, but this is funny. If this is what this means, this is actually what we've been assessing, right? When we talked about John, right? We talked about his business. We talked about Access Graphics, and we talked about the fact that John might be fudging the numbers a little bit. He might be fudging because Jeff Merrick is like, hey, or one of the employees are like, hey, I mean, this sales data doesn't look real. Somebody starts talking about it. Some people say, oh, the Ramseys are kind of fake. This could be the case because even your lawyer is saying, hey, man, some of this stuff is for appearances. And I know he's not trying to be rude, but he might just be telling the truth. Hey, this looks nice from the outside, but on the inside, there's a lot of chaos. What you're seeing on the outside is for appearances, but on the inside, there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of internal chaos that you should be aware of, that you should be taking note of. You think that everything is good and people can show you what they want you to see. It's just like social media. People can show you what they want you to see, but it might not necessarily be true. And this could be the case where the lawyer is saying, hey, I spent not only a year intentionally representing them, but I spent these last 24 years representing John pro bono, in a sense, staying on top of this case. Even though he doesn't have the money to pay me, I still kind of represent him. So you develop this long-term relationship in which you're speaking about now. And you're saying these people lived in a gingerbread house, which means that there could be a lot of chaos in this house that is being covered up. And that's this is from the external perspective. This is how John and Patsy Ramsey do. They cover things up. It looks like the gingerbread, it looks good. It looks like it has a solid surface, but it's really soft, made to collapse. That's crazy that your lawyer is saying that. This couple is made to collapse. They are not made to withstand the pressure. There are different proverbs about foundations. You know, if the foundation isn't good, the house is not going to stand. It's going to fall because you don't have a good foundation. And so you're telling me here that the Ramseys don't have a good foundation. Everything that you see here is an illusion. It's fake. Everything is here to cover up the issues. And what can we tell about that? What we can tell about that is if we're talking about individuals who do this, then there are things in their life. They run their life in a way that they don't deal with issues. They cover them up. This is almost, I would say, intergenerational. Real problems, real issues, real things going on in your life that you don't address. It's almost what you might call trauma bonding in a way. Why do I bring trauma bonding into it? I bring trauma bonding because if you have two people who come from families, remember what I say, birds of a feather flock together. And if you have two individuals who come from families who cover things up, there's a certain level of trauma because these kids are going to go through things that they look and they say, I don't know about that. Their little kid mind says, I don't know about that. But the adults are telling me that this makes sense. You know, in my kid mind, they can't reconcile that. They get older. Patsy's caught at an age and she's being asked to marry at an age to where she hasn't matured yet. I'm not saying that she's dumb or anything. I'm just saying she's at an age to where she hasn't had life experiences for herself to be able to engage and really think deeply about these things, whether or not she needs therapy. She hasn't had time to think about that because she doesn't truly know herself. So she gets in a relationship with John. And I'm not saying, you know, that it's a problem. I'm just saying that there are advantages to John being older and Patsy not being allowed to explore herself, coming right out of college, not being allowed to explore herself. Now, this was Patsy's choice, but Patsy not being allowed to explore herself in the fullness. And so a lot of times what the younger partner can do is take on the identity of the older partner, especially if the partner is that much older, because you're talking about somebody who doesn't have the experience, the life experience of somebody like a John Ramsey. So a lot of times when they dote on their partner to that degree, they dote on the older partner. It could be the case that they say, you know, my husband teaches me so many things. I love him so much. And everything I know about life is from my adult life is from my husband. You know, because you essentially take the good with the bad. John has taught me so many good things about, or he showed me so many good things. We've had so many great experiences about living. He gave me, you know, not only living, but living wealthy. And he gave me my first child. So I'm bonded to him. You know, we don't know if Patsy had any other relations before John. And if she didn't, she's bonded to John. And that could be a very vulnerable position. Why? Because if you're bonded to somebody, especially as a woman, if you're bonded to this guy, you may figure out some things about yourself later on in life that, you know, they don't really, I want to say, jive with the ideologies of your partner. You know, it's hard to reconcile with the ideologies of your partner, but this is who I'm growing into. This is the young woman that I'm growing into. I'm starting to develop my own sense of self and perspectives on the world as an adult, right? Things I've been able to think about away from John because John is gone. I've been able to think about these things and develop my own theory of self and what I want to do and how I want to live life that might be counter to the ideologies of John. And so you have, and in these times, Patsy is thinking about maybe some things that she's gone through in life that she didn't like, that were sort of traumatic experiences for her. And then the same thing is with John, but John has learned to suppress it. And so Patsy thinks that by being with John, she never hears him talk about these traumatic experiences. So she in turn takes the nonverbal cue to suppress her feelings. And so Patsy, who might be very emotional and very emotionally aware, becomes emotionally unaware because of John. And I'm not trying to say he's a bad person because of this, but I'm just talking about the natural dynamics of a relationship that might evolve over time because of the social patterns that you are perceiving from somebody that you hold in high regard in your life. And so as Patsy is perceiving these social cues from John, she's saying, well, maybe, he's smarter than me. He's more intelligent. I'm smart in my own right, but he's more experienced as an adult. So the way that I guess I should deal with my feelings is that maybe I should just suppress. And so things that Patsy may have done, she may have gone to therapy. She may have sought out help. She may have been communicative with her friends to a greater extent about some of the problems going on within her and within her household, trying to get that feedback to understand more, but she couldn't do it, or she wouldn't do it because in her mind, John says, don't let anything go outside of this house. And so that presents, and I get that you don't want all your business out in the streets, but that presents this idea that when friends share with you, you don't share with them. And so we never have a real relationship because everybody is confiding in Patsy, but Patsy is not really confiding anything real or of substance to anyone else. That's a problem because Patsy does not have an outlet. It's a cover-up. John is the same way. John could have gone through some stuff. John could, especially with the loss of his mother and going through a divorce, right? And then losing Beth. And all John does, cover it up. So you have two individuals full of trauma coming together. And I know Beth was later on, but let's take Beth out of it. But you have two individuals, but I think his mom had already passed. So you have two individuals, and Nidra may have been sort of this whip wielding mother who made Patsy do some things that Patsy didn't want to do. And that can be very traumatic for a child. And then John's dad being a very militaristic. You can see in some of those things that John still talks very militaristic. We had to fight. We had to go to war. We had to show our power. We had to show our strength. That's his dad. John was in the military, yes, but he did that because of his dad. That's my belief. And so all of the lessons, that's not military coming through. That's John's dad coming through. We had to fight. We had to, we had to show our power. So that could be very traumatic. In that John may have wanted to show emotion in some certain circumstances or instances, couldn't do it because a man is told to be this and you can't show emotion here. So John just suppresses his emotions. And so when you have two people who have these traumatic experiences, they come together, they trauma bond. And so the relationship is not really substantive or built on any real legitimate principles. It's built on sort of like a gingerbread foundation. It's built on two individuals who have a hard exterior, but a very soft interior, or interior that is waiting to collapse when the right moment comes, when certain things that are left unapproached or undealt with. You have two individuals who don't know how to deal with these problems. And so things begin to crumble and it just so happens that you do it in front of the whole world in spotlight and having to work out your issues. And that can take a toll on people. And I think when he says this about this sort of gingerbread house, that's very, very telling, because this is the way in which John and Patsy operate on a personal and individual level, and thus they come together and operate like this on a combined or a couples level. And guess what? You have two people who come together who operate on this level. Guess what kind of home and posterity they're going to build? They're going to build a home of hard externality but soft internality. Things left unsaid, things undealt with, things unapproached. What does that do? That means that you have kids, that you will have kids then who have issues that they cannot communicate with you because you're taught to be strong, don't cry, don't complain, wipe the tears away. You don't have a legitimate, yeah, but you don't have to cry about it. But mama have a legitimate gripe, yeah, but you don't have to, yeah, but toughen up. Burke may have gotten 3 years of this, and so he learns, and then JonBenet gets 6 years of this, and by the time Burke has got 9 years of this, can't talk to anybody, can't say anything to anybody. What would that lead to? What would that do? Right? And so that's a very telling line. That's a very telling line. That Hal Haddon, I just think that it's extremely telling that Hal Haddon speaks of when he says this. But anyways, the next thing that I note here is that Haddon says that the BPD contaminated the scene. But then he goes on to say that when JonBenet Ramsey was brought upstairs, Patsy and 5 of her friends, and the 5 friends who were comforting her, Patsy and 5 of her friends. Now he mentions that they got all these friends in the house, and they're walking all over the house. He doesn't mention that they contaminate. You know what I mean? He withholds that language, but he says that when JonBenet Ramsey was brought upstairs, Patsy and 5 of her friends fell on JonBenet and clutched her and cried. Clutched her and cried. Contamination. Clutched her and cried. Contaminate. So when we talk about the unidentified male DNA, I'm not so sure that there is a legitimate profile. Even if we talk about the unidentified male DNA, I don't think that's a legitimate profile. Because when we look through the forensics and the DNA, it talks about, we're talking about an individual who the touch DNA, well, the forensics talk about it's going to be JBR, and another person. And in some cases, it mentions 3 people, 3 or more. I'm starting to lean more toward the case that it could be more, because this is heavy contamination. And he admits, and this is where he says it here. He says Boulder police sent a bunch of officers over who contaminated the scene. At one point, one of the officers told John Ramsey and one of his friends, "Why don't you look around the house and see what you can find?" Rather than securing the house for evidence and searching it themselves, they had already come and done that. And if I remember correctly, I can't remember. I think it's in interviews, and I'll have to go back and look. But they did try to clear people out of the house several times throughout the day. If my memory is serving me correctly, they did try to do this several times throughout the day. Move people out of the house. We're already talking about something that the cops did and try to do. But this is we're already at contamination. What does it matter? We're already at contamination. But then he says, so John Ramsey and his friend walked around the house and went down to the basement, and in a closed storeroom in the basement, John Ramsey found his daughter JonBenet laying on the floor dead, picked her up, carried her upstairs. Patsy, JonBenet's mother, and about 5 of her friends were sitting, comforting Patsy, and laid JonBenet down in front of her. They all fell on JonBenet and clutched her and cried. Contamination. Why are you trying to blame it on the cops? This is contamination. Contamination. If you look at it from a forensic standpoint, and this is what he's going on to say, Hal Haddon is going on to say, the contamination of the crime scene was just horrendous. We know. But all that aside, the tabloid press grabbed it because it's the next OJ. And they decided that the spin that they were going to put on it was rich people who put their kids in beauty pageants are basically child abusers. Not even basically, that's the spin that they put on it from the beginning. I mean, we had the forensic report. We had the forensic report. We had the search warrants. You see what I mean? We had the DNA evidence, or I'm sorry, the autopsy report, the search warrants, forensic reports that you said that you got and knew early on. I mean, John Ramsey talks a lot about not knowing anything and not reading anything, but you sure knew that the forensics came out, the DNA report came out. You sure knew about that even before they sent it off to Cellmark Labs or whatever, to Cellmark Labs after taking it from the CBI, and they sent it off, I believe. Y'all knew about the first report. And I said, give us a second. We want to, test some more. Want to get a second opinion. Y'all know about that. Dead on their trail. So you know about a lot of the stuff that's going on. So you know that there's a lot of contamination, and you know that it's most likely that this DNA is not going to say anything. That's what we know. And that's why I say, when we look at the unknown male, and if we're going to say the unknown male was there's culpability there, then we have to say the same thing for Burke and Patsy, because there's just as much culpability in Burke and Patsy. According to that forensic report, there's just as much culpability in those two as the unidentified male. But we're shading things. So I go on to note that's contamination. And he says that, it's horrendous. So we already know. And this is telling us that we already know that the DNA and the forensics ain't going to work. We're already going to have problems. It's going to be an uphill battle. But you notice, in one of the most challenging parts of the case, John continues to hammer on one of the most challenging parts of the case. One of the most difficult parts to work through in the case, because there's a lot of contamination. We know from the reports that some things that they didn't even test because there is contamination, especially with regard to John. We know that. And so the fact that we're even having this conversation and John is continually harping on the DNA, that almost says a little something to me. John, this is contaminated, almost, dare I might say, contaminated. And if this is chess and not checkers, which it might be shaping up that, it is, according to this attorney, you guys may well know that it's too much contamination. So you can speak comfortably about the DNA and push for certain things on the DNA, because it could be very likely that you can't even test that DNA, because it's like they said on some of the parts of the gowns and the pants, the long johns. Can't use that. It's too contaminated. Can't use that part. Can't test that. So knowing that and being aware that that part is, you can continue to push the DNA because it's not going anywhere. And also knowing the cost of it, and knowing that there's no funding efforts for that, because you ain't gonna fund it. Instead of spending all your money on attorneys, what you could have done was spent your money on DNA testing, because that same $10 million that John that they said John was good for in the police report, that one of his friends said that John was good for, that same $10 million that you're good for, you could have defined the killer of your daughter. You could, especially the $100,000 that you said you know what I mean, you want to put up for the reward for the finding your daughter's killer. You could have took that same 100,000. You could have took that same 10 million to get some DNA tests run on certain items or clothes, because you have the means. Guess what? When people have cancer and they have money, guess what? They do anything because they have the means to pay for it. John Ramsey and Patsy Ramsey had the means and they hired private investigators to go chase people down. They had the means to do more important work. Instead of talking about random theories and getting random theories through a tip line, they had the monetary means, especially after selling their houses and doing a bunch of interviews, probably paid, talk for pay circuit. Instead of putting their money toward that, instead of downsizing and saying we're in for a rude awakening in terms of monetary value, and plus the payoff, the severance that John got from GE when Lockheed sold Access Graphics over to GE. The severance that he got. Instead of taking that money and putting it toward DNA testing, they spent all their money on lawyers. Every last penny they had did not go to anything fruitful. Everything that they did went to protecting them from going to jail instead of protecting them or making sure that they weren't accused, instead of saying, let's find my daughter. We have the money to find my daughter. We're going to spend half of it just to make sure that we're protected. I'm going to get a lawyer just to make sure that I'm protected, just to make sure there's no funny business. I don't need the biggest lawyer in the world. I just need to make sure I have a lawyer here to tell me what to say and what not to say. But they didn't do that now, did they? They went and got the most expensive lawyer. And it's like, when you're budgeting, guess what? You go to the store and you say, I'm not going to get the most expensive thing if I'm budgeting. You know what? I only got $20. I need something that's going to feed us for a couple days at least. Guess what you're going to get? You're probably going to get stuff for spaghetti. Huh? Probably going to get some cheap. Going to get some stuff to make some sandwiches. Because you know you're going to get tired of spaghetti. Guess what you're going to get to drink? Something cheap. Hawaiian punch. The big thing of Hawaiian punch. Or whatever you get. But you're going to apportion your money appropriately. Because you're going to say, I know my finances. I'm aware of my finances. Because John is not an idiot. John is very aware of his finances. He knows how much money he has. And he knows about the timing of cash flows. So if you're aware, you know how to run a business and you know how to budget, you're in tune with the finances, and you're very aware about the timing of cash flows and what money is in the bank and what you're going to have to do to sell and make money, and you're going to jump on the talk circuit to make money. Why would you go get the most expensive lawyer even though you know it's out of your price range? Why are you so desperate to get the most expensive lawyer even though you know that lawyer is outside of your price range? That's like going and trying to pay for a Mercedes-Benz when you know the payment's going to be $1,000, $1,500 a month, and you only know that you're going to be good for $750 a month. Go get a car that you can pay $750 a month for, because you're going to have to pay for car insurance. You're going to have to pay for car maintenance. Why go get the car for $1,500 that is like double what you have? Why would you do that? You're not going to be able to make the payment. But somehow, some way, the Ramseys thought it was so serious, and they were so desperate that they said, this is out of my price range, but I'm still going to go get it anyway. What does that say about a person who's that desperate to go get a super lawyer who's out of their price range, but they say, yes, pull the trigger? Instead of saying, this ain't got nothing to do with me. I already know I didn't do it. You ain't going to find nothing on me. But even with all the, because look, we're talking about even with all the contamination, even with everything going in the house, the Ramseys deny this crazy. If you're that confident in your denial, what would there be that the cops can find that might turn the tide and shift? You're wealthy. You get the cops have given you the benefit of the doubt. You're wealthy. But what is there that could turn the tide, that is so bad, that can turn the tide to make you go say, you know what? I think I need I need a team of super lawyers, because Haddon has several super lawyers in his firm. Why do you need a team of super lawyers? Because you're not paying for one super lawyer and saying, we're just going to get this one guy to represent us. You're saying, I'm going to get a team of them. They're all good. They all can't be messed with. That's just like, because the Chicago Bulls, if you guys are sports fans again, the Chicago Bulls only had one Michael Jordan. You, Michael Jordan, and if you have a Michael Jordan is going to be the most expensive player on your team because he's the best. You're not going to have 5 Michael Jordans because you can't afford it. You can't pay everybody Michael Jordan money. But that's exactly what the Ramseys did. They said, we're going to go pay all of you guys Michael Jordan money. And not only that, but we're going to go pay other people Michael Jordan money to represent my wife, and then to represent both of us in defamation, and then to represent my ex-wife and kids. We're going to go pay Michael Jordan money. Everybody on the team has to be Michael Jordan. Everybody has to be good as Michael Jordan. You could have literally got the second best lawyer in Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado, and you should have been fine. And the rest of that money, you could have still lived in Colorado and been close to the case and kept all of your assets. Still done the talk for pay circuit on TV. You could have done that. And then part of that money, you could have said, we're going to pay for DNA analysis on certain parts. Because I wonder, because the BPD put their money where their mouth was. They spent $1.6 million on this case. All the Ramseys did was hire a legal team to go check out everybody else. Instead of saying, you know what, the best way that I can work with the police is to help them pay for some of this stuff. I want to put my money toward it. Because I'm not saying if you don't have the means, then absolutely leave it alone. But if you have the means, why not? If somebody has cancer, guess what? You're going to spare no expense. You're going to go to every single doctor. You're going to get a bunch of second opinions. You're going to get multiple opinions. Because without that, without the money, without the means, I can't get multiple opinions. I take the first diagnosis. But when I have means, I go for multiple opinions and I get different perspectives, get more data points. And that's what the Ramseys did here. They say, you know what? I'm going to get the biggest. I'm going to get the best. Another point I have here is that, and this is Haddon, he says the BPD and some prosecutors were blinded by the lights in the media frenzy. He makes a distinction. He says some prosecutors, not all. There are some prosecutors that stayed grounded. We know it ain't Alex Hunter. We know it ain't Alex Hunter. Because to our understanding, Alex Hunter was talking. I can't remember where I saw that, man. But I was reading an article to where they were saying that Alex Hunter was opening his door to the tabloids, to the media. Come in, talk to me. Oh, Brennan. It was Charles Brennan who reported that. He was like, oh yeah, come on in. So we know DA Hunter was blinded by the lights. So who are you talking about? Because he says some prosecutors, talking about the DA's office. Goes on to say Haddon got a call. The notes say that Haddon got a call from a corporate business lawyer of John Ramsey, Mike Bynum, and said it seems that the police want to charge. I'll go down to it. Got a call. That's a long way of saying what happened to me on December 27th of 96, because I got a call from the Ramseys corporate lawyer, a terrific guy named Mike Bynum. We talked about the Kobe Bryant analysis. And Rob Pelinka was Kobe Bryant's agent who recommended Hal Haddon. Here we have the same kind of deal. Mike Bynum, corporate lawyer, corporate attorney for John Ramsey's business, said, my dear friends have lost their daughter, and the police simply, it seems to me, want to charge them with it, and there's no way they could have done it. The Ramseys lost their daughter. Kidnapped is what you mean, right? You mean the Ramseys' daughter was kidnapped, right? So Bynum jumps in and says the police want to charge them, and I don't think there's any way that they've done it. This is on the 27th. We don't have any evidence at this point. And Bynum is telling a high-powered attorney that there's no way that the Ramseys could be in on this. How do you know, Mike? That is quite ignorant. I'll be honest with you. That is quite ignorant to say. To say that there's no way that they could have done this? Are you kidding me? Why not? This is literally the next day from the following day from when JonBenet was found. And you're saying that there's nothing that we can lead. The cops can think about several things that they've done. They stated it. Hey, looks like you wrote this letter. Everything from the outside looks secure, according to what you told me. Is this person invisible? Do they walk through walls? You're suggesting to me that two old people who maybe in the past they've had some criminal activity, but not now, that they would be interested in sneaking through a window. That's what you suggested. A retired professor and a lady who just wants to clean your house. She would be interested in climbing down a window. These folks don't got nothing better to do than climb through the window of your basement. That's what we are being led to believe. That is more plausible than anything that the parents could have done. And they just can't do, they just couldn't be them. We don't have all of the evidence, but they jumped on top of it very early. He jumped on this very early, similar to the Kobe Bryant situation, similar to what Rob Pelinka did with Kobe Bryant. Jumped on this thing very early. Without evidence, without anything that legitimately rules John and Patsy out, stating that they did. And so now Haddon is working on the theory that it's not the parents, and he's doing everything to prove that it wasn't. And we know that Haddon isn't stupid. Haddon is well aware that John and Patsy could be lying to him to shade the truth their way. And as we go through our analysis, there have been multiple cases in which John and Patsy have been caught into some very contradictory stuff. Somebody asked me, why don't you just leave these people alone? JonBenet is dead, and we haven't gotten any resolution for that. We just want to stop and not get any resolution for JonBenet. I want to go back to a point really quickly about the DNA and how Haddon was talking about, hey, you know, it was a mess. The forensics were a mess. John pushed that so hard. And I think I forgot my point. That's what it was, because I was going to make it, but I got distracted by something. John pushed this DNA thing so hard, even knowing that there was such contamination, because the lawyer knows it. The lawyer knows there's contamination. So you know it's a very weak point of this analysis. It's not worth pushing. But John is pushing it. Why? But I was going to say it's crazy because the very thing that John could have done to help strengthen the DNA was to allow the BPD to continue to examine JonBenet's body. But he was such in a rush to bury JonBenet that he did not allow them to do a thorough check. There were still tests that the coroner did not do that could have confirmed time of death. The coroner did not have time to do that because John yanked JonBenet out of that morgue and said she's going to Atlanta. instead of allowing them. And God bless Linda Arndt and accompanying detectives who went to, I believe it was the morgue, the coroner's office, and stood by him and said, let's use this black light to see what we can find in the time allotted that we have. The very thing that you could have done, you could have exhumed, not even exhumed, well, maybe so. You could have exhumed JonBenet's body and said, let's take a look at this. You don't even have to exhume it. You could have just not buried her and said, we need to continue searching her body for clues, and then we'll bury her. But John said, no, she's been through too much. She's dead. I'm sorry to say it like that, but she's dead. And I don't mean to be just crass. She's dead. She doesn't know anything. I bet if she were alive, she would appreciate that what we're doing. So no, I'm not going to leave this alone, because I understand what you're saying about John and Patsy. Yeah, they seem like great people, but their daughter's dead. How are we going to find, if we can't rule the parents out? I'm not just about to start looking at other people if we can't even rule the parents out. Why would anybody do that? That does not make sense. But here we have a lawyer calling and saying, I don't think the parents did it. We don't have all of the evidence. But somehow, some way, they've convinced the public that enough evidence was gathered within one day to exonerate the Ramseys. And we should have never been looking at them. No. Going back to my notes, let me say John Haddon got a call. And then lastly, Haddon goes on to say that the Ramseys essentially, talks about, hey, I jumped on my snowcat and I went back there, so on and so forth. And he says, I still represent John Ramsey after about a year of this 24-year investigation. The Ramseys went essentially broke, and we continue to represent them without fee ever since. This was in 2020, I think, where Hal Haddon is saying this. And the question comes, one of the things that you said to me that I think summarizes exactly what happened to John and Patsy was that the only thing that wasn't taken from them from this nightmare was their liberty. And Hal Haddon responds and says, in the course of all this media holocaust and law enforcement targeting, I know that they lost a part of their sanity. They lost all their they lost all their reputation. They lost all their money. Patsy died of ovarian cancer. John is still alive and living in Moab, Utah, where he runs a tour flight service. But the media and the police destroy these people, and they're utterly innocent victims of a monstrous crime. And we see here John and Patsy Ramsey, or Patsy and John Ramsey. The Ramseys dedicated everything, and I'll end with this. The Ramseys dedicated everything to lawyers when they could have dedicated money to finding JonBenet's killer through DNA analysis, something that John, when we talk about doing everything that you can do, we clearly see that John has not done everything that he can do, because half of that money, those proceeds, the proceeds from the book, proceeds from his second book, his sole authored book. Well, the book without Patsy. Those proceeds could have gone to, the JonBenet Foundation. How much money have they raised for the JonBenet Foundation? Oh wait, it's defunct. It's closed. All the stuff that John said that they would do with the foundation in the fight. The point of the fight, didn't follow through with it. Went broke doing something else. It's almost as if you were never truly focused on, because that's a tool to find justice for JonBenet. That foundation would have been a great tool to find justice for JonBenet and other people like her. But instead, your focus wasn't there. Your focus was on protecting yourself. And I want to ask this question. What pressure did the police ever legitimately put on John and Patsy that a cheaper lawyer, a less expensive lawyer, couldn't have done? What kind of pressure was the BPD putting on them that a regular lawyer, because you hired private investigators and all of that, and they came up with nothing? The tips were trash, garbage. What did they find? Nothing. So you wasted money hiring them. Well, you could have just left it alone and spent your money. That could have been money that you spent with the BPD and that you could have, used to find some samples, test some samples, test some clothing. But instead of doing that, and instead of keeping the foundation up and running, instead of getting those donors and everything, because we're talking about the fact that John and Patsy are so hated. But what I hear from John is that everywhere he goes, people say they understand. Well, get support from these people. Tap into your base. You clearly have people. Even now, you could start a foundation right now. You could reopen the JonBenet Ramsey Foundation right now, and people would give in droves. All the people that you say you've met and who have supported you, in droves they would give, because people are passionate about this case. And then you could send that money over to, because why does it seem like everybody else is trying to solve this case? Why does it seem like everybody else is trying to come up with the money for this additional DNA analysis? What is John doing except badgering the police? Calling up there and badgering them and saying, what are you doing about my daughter? What are you doing about your daughter? Nothing. Not even trying. But anyways, those are all my notes. I can cross this out now. We've discussed this. Those are just my notes. Like I said, I am reading this because I want to deal more extensively with the strategy, the specific strategy, like we talked about in the Kobe Bryant case, the emotional component, the tactical component, and the legal basis, and all these discussions about how Hal Haddon tongue twister, try that. How Hal Haddon tried to frame the case in the public, how he framed it, because you might notice that a lot of this stuff, as we compare to the Kobe Bryant case, a lot of this stuff is just Hal Haddon's legal playbook. So stuff that you thought proved the Ramseys' innocence is really just all of how Hal Haddon is painting a picture to present to you. That's what it is. So anyways, that's the video. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Appreciate your support. Until next time, take it easy.